In the world of gaming, the players mainly have two separate but equally desirable experiences. One is through computational devices taking input through buttons, joysticks, and mice and is displayed on a screen. The other is on paper and cardboard with dice, plastic pieces, and pencils on a table. We represent both. I'm Not Much 23,
And I'm Chaos Assassin.
and this is Gamer Experience. And I know we've introduced a few series already, a couple of which are designed to be recurring to bring back to whenever we have content.
The memory of what they are,
Gaming pet peeves and character stories.
which, I'd love to do more character stories, but we're not getting any sent in to us, which
No.
kind of sucks because I know we have some listeners out there who have stories.
Yes.
Maybe they don't know how to reach us. Well, how do they send their stories in again?
Gamersperience at gmail.com. That's GAMERSPERIENCE at gmail.com, as in Google's mail service.
What else could it be?
Sorry.
Now I'm thinking of other things that could be Gmail, grocery mail.
Yeah, but G sounds a lot like B, C, D, E, and
That
V.
is fair.
Yeah.
That is very much fair.
Which is why I actually did it in phonetic, NATO phonetic at one point.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. If memory serves, we were going to be doing something to do with settings and how they affect the gaming, right?
Yes. This is going to be a recurring series upon different types of settings, how they affect the experience, and of course, when I say settings, things mean things like science fiction, science fantasy, post-apocalyptic, medieval / Renaissance fantasy, modern, mid-century, stuff like that.
Okay. So my thought with it is obviously there's high fantasy, there's sci-fi and things like that, but how many games that are set in one scenario could also be set in another?
That's a very good point.
Because there's certain things you can't do. Like, first thing that pops in my head, you couldn't send, the group from Baldur's Gate 3 into Cyberpunk 2077. Granted, it'd be hilarious to see how Lae'zel would handle all of the cybernetics and stuff, because that'd just be entertaining. But I like the idea of us actually going more in depth as far as the games, as far as the settings and everything that goes in with them.
Yeah, I think the most popular ones you like are like high medieval fantasy and maybe post-apocalyptic.
Um, yeah, high fantasy or like some of the post-apocalyptic, yeah. That'd fall under Skyrim, Fallout 4, Baldur's Gate. Mainly
Pathfinder.
it's high fantasy. Like that's like my bread and butter.
Yeah, Pathfinder, Legends of Zelda.
Yep.
Of course, could do a series about different genres like action, platformer, puzzle, simulation, stuff like
Well,
that.
I would think that those things like those the genres fall under the same type of style as far as settings because they're part of the setting.
Yeah, but there's more. I mean, they're two different things. They're very similar, but they're
I
actually separate types of categories. Like you,
I'd say let's just put them in with this series that we're doing. Because
yeah,
when I think platformer, first thing I think of is Mario.
yeah, and that's setting kind of more like a modern fantasy.
hmm But I've yet to see a post-apocalyptic platformer. Everything I see post-apocalyptic typically is some sort of like FPS or survival.
Yeah, except I do know of like a sci-fi factory builder.
Yeah, which that's a category as well because those are simulation games,
Yeah,
and there's some post-apocalyptic simulation games or simulation games as well.
yeah, I know there is.
Um, no, due to the fact that high fantasy is my bread and butter. Um, I, I'd say what makes it as good as it is the fact that it's its own world without any sort of ties to this world. It's
Yeah,
why I like those as much as they are. But if memory serves, the definition of high fantasy would be similar to or worlds that have um more medieval thinking, but it's not because there's a lot of things that could go into
mainly
it. But
magic.
magic, dragons, different races like elves, orc, half orc, those would be fantasy or high fantasy. We'll actually have to look into the actual definition of the difference between fantasy and high fantasy because I actually don't know the difference, and I'm pretty sure there is one. I'm actually
Fantasy
curious on that.
fantasy though is actually very broad.
That is true.
Well, the term at least.
Because isn't sci-fi science fiction fantasy?
Yes, that actually is a type of fantasy.
Yeah. So that's just one of those things that I enjoy. With my issue with sci-fi is I've never been real tech savvy. It's why I don't really care for a lot of the science fiction stuff. A friend of mine got me into cyberpunk, and that's really been my main thing as far as the science fiction goes. Um, I do enjoy cyberpunk because it's kind of RPG like, and I like RPGs, which typically fall under high fantasy or fantasy, because that's you. It's just one of those things I enjoy.
And here, I love science fiction.
Mm-hmm. That's why we're great co-hosts. Is you love more laid back simulation games and science fiction. I like more action and high fantasy games. But lately, I've been doing a lot of more first person shooters because that's what my friend group's been playing. Um, we're getting back into Baldur's Gate, but we played Baldur's Gate like for 2 3 months almost nonstop. So we kind of burnt ourselves out. So we swapped over to the new Call of Duty game, which it's had its bugs, but I'm enjoying it because I'm playing with friends.
And most first person shooters are either modern or,
Historical.
yeah, not very many
Um,
sci fi first person shooters, Halo being the most notable exception.
Halo, Destiny, Warframe. Um,
Doom?
I don't know. I think Doom would be an apocalyptic sci-fi. I actually don't know. I don't know much about Doom. That's something that our viewers are going to have to inform us on. Like,
Because,
I'm actually curious. What are some of our viewers' favorite settings? Not just whether it be fantasy, or sci-fi, but like, what are some of y'all's game settings that y'all actually enjoy?
because,
I would love for them to make a game, other games like Skyrim, with that same kind of setting that's not Elder Scrolls.
but the original Doom is set on Deimos, one of Mars' moons.
Is it really?
Yes.
Hmm. I didn't know that. I've never played Doom.
That's why I mentioned it as sci-fi.
I always saw it as like an apocalyptic thing because it's always on fire or in hell. That's how I saw it.
Well, I mean, there is a portion where apparently you go into hell, but it's the original Doom starts on Deimos or Phobos. I think
Here's
it's
one for
Deimos.
you. What kind of setting is something like BioShock?
That's probably a combination. Something else we can talk about. Combination of post-apocalyptic and science fiction.
Yeah, I could see it being, but I also don't see it as post-apocalyptic.
Well, at least the original one, because didn't Rapture basically like the society collapse?
That's only because of cutthroats, but yeah, I could see it, but it really wasn't in apocalyptic. It was just abandoned and overrun with crazy people.
Isn't that one of the hallmarks of post-apocalyptic settings, though?
Yeah, but so
Ba-
is Detroit, but that's not post-apocalyptic.
Actually, I think Detroit did go through its own little apocalypse.
Holy shit, Detroit's in apocalypse now.
Yeah,
Maybe that's why Ohio doesn't exist anymore. But I do enjoy I do enjoy things that are a little bit different. Um, Another thing about the settings and stuff is not just like necessarily settings, but like the artwork. Does that make or break a game?
It can definitely.
hmm I'm thinking instead of this just focusing on the settings, we break down what helps make or break games through our own experiences. It's a little more broad and gives us little more we could talk about each thing.
Like how art isn't as big as mechanics.
Yeah, but I'm sorry if they tried to do Zelda-like animations for a Borderlands game, it wouldn't work. Like everybody knows the Borderlands style of artwork, which I
Yeah.
swear JoJo's Bizarre Adventures stole from. Because now that I think about it, JoJo's Bizarre Adventures would fit in the Borderlands artwork type thing. It's neither cartoony nor animated. It's its own style. I don't know what the actual style is. I'm pretty sure there's an actual name for it, but you could not do a Borderlands game and not the Borderlands style. It's named after its own style. It's just that good.
But then again, art cannot save a bad game.
No. Borderlands artwork could not save Borderlands 3. There are people that are like, it's a good game, it's a good game. It's like, now, that's like saying Cyberpunk was a good game when it first came out.
To be fair, fans kind of force the
Yeah.
developers to release it early.
I know that. Now, Cyberpunk's phenomenal. Borderlands 3, okay, I'll give it to you. It's an alright game. Is it as good as Borderlands 2 or Borderlands 1? No. Is it better than the pre-sequel? Debatable. But that's just one of those things that I didn't care for it because I got it on release day. They had hyped it up and it flopped. That's my biggest issue with Borderlands 3. I'm trying to think of like other parts of settings that we could talk about because I know we don't want to really go in depth in this episode. We're just talking about what we kind of can do with this episode, right?
More how what mechanics lend themselves better to what settings. Like magic mechanics lend themselves much better to medieval fantasy settings.
That's fair. Magic would not work in a high fantasy post-apocalyptic. It really wouldn't.
Well,
But I could see magic working in a sci-fi kind of thing.
yeah, I mean, Starfinder does it.
Yeah,
Starfield tried.
but that's also one of those things that's really hard to do.
Yeah.
There are certain genres that I think actually pair well together. Sci-fi and post-apocalyptic, that works well. Post-apocalyptic and high fantasy,
Not so much.
I'm trying to think of a game that's like that. Elden Ring and the Souls games, Dark Souls games.
I
They're
mean,
a high fantasy, but they're also set in like an apocalyptic type of time. But I think that's a stretch.
yeah, that really is a stretch.
But I could see it.
What else pairs well?
And just about anything I think could pair with an FPS.
An F-
Like I can't think of any genre that wouldn't work with first person shooters.
high fantasy has trouble.
Yeah, but Stealth Archer for Skyrim.
Or heretic.
That's another thing. The difference between being in first person versus third person. How does that affect games? Because technically, the Metal Gear games are considered a FPS, but they have you in third person.
It's
But
a
that's
third.
also espionage and stealth games.
Yeah, but that's a third person shooter.
Mm-mm. If you actually look it up, it does not fall under the third person category.
How can it be a first person shooter that keeps you in third person?
No clue. Probably because you can actually go into third person. Or first person, sorry. To actually shoot.
Grand Theft Auto 5 then would also be a first person shooter. Because in
Which
certain
I think is
versions.
classified as a third person.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe because no, because Metal Gear is just as old as Grand Theft Auto.
Well, the first.
Because the original Metal Gear games weren't. You couldn't go into first person. But that still doesn't make any sense. Maybe we need to also bring into the fact of why are certain games classified the way they are? because that's very confusing as far as how things are set up like that.
Yeah, but of course, I think to do this properly, we'd actually need to get a list of the different types of settings.
Yeah. I think you're right though. We would need to get a list of the different games and how they're classified. As far as what classifies what are the main classifications and other there's sub classifications for other classifications. Is third person shooters under a category of first person shooters? Or are they two separate categories?
I'd put them as two subcategories of shooters.
Fair. Also, if there's a first person shooter and a third person shooter, what's a second person shooter?
The camera is facing the player model.
That'd be an interesting way of playing the game.
You wouldn't be able to see anything you were shooting at.
That's fair.
And that's
What
why
kind of
there's.
game is Minecraft a simulator?
That's a really good question.
I could also see people doing a post-apocalyptic version of like Minecraft. Isn't that called Rust?
It might be.
Also, Raft. Is that a flooded post-apocalyptic?
I don't know what Raft is.
Raft is a game where you're stuck on a raft and you have to basically get from location to location apparently because while, catching things and building a raft and surviving.
I think that'd be partially a survival game, though.
Yeah, but is it a post-apocalyptic survival?
I don't
Because
know,
then
but
there's things like oh, I forget the name. But literally there's a plane crash and you're stuck on an island and then you have to survive.
is it one of the Far Cry games?
No. Far Cry a survival game? Or is it just an FPS type game?
I think it's partially survival, at least also in some of the later ones, maybe.
What designates it as a survival game?
Um,
That's a good question. We're
yeah,
just going down this rabbit hole for what we could talk about as far as settings for the game. And yet we ourselves would have to go through and actually look up and actually discuss different genres and settings for games.
and probably find guests that can also shed some more light where we don't have much knowledge.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I know some people that could, probably enlighten us on some first person shooters.
Oh, I'm sure you do.
I don't know anybody who's like mainly plays survival games though.
We're gonna have to start looking.
Yeah. Hear that, listeners? If you play a lot of survival games, let us know. Maybe we can have you as a guest and, have you tell us more about survival games. Are horror games part of survival? Or is horror just its own section?
I think there's survival, there's horror, and there's a combination called survival horror.
Yeah. Outlast Trials, I think is what the game's called. I know somebody who plays that, but that's I think the only game they play. I know some people that play horror games though. So
And I don't really like horror.
neither do I.
So we would really need to bring in somebody for that one.
Yeah, that's true.
I guess we'd have to evaluate like how well does sticking to a setting or a genre affect the experience, or could the experience be enhanced by sort of maybe straying away a little bit?
Hmm. Also, how far outside of our comfort zone that like for me, I mainly play high fantasy games. I've never been huge into first person shooters. My friends, only were playing first person shooters, so in order to play with my friends, I started playing them. I'm apparently half decent at it, surprisingly enough. But is it something I enjoy? Not really. Am I having fun with friends? Yes. And that's the main reason I do it. Does going outside your comfort zone and playing other things, why? Why did you go from this genre to another? That's another thing we could talk about. Why would people go from one genre to a different one that's vastly different than what they normally would play?
Yeah, that's another good question. You know,
We need just write. We need to make like a thing where we just write down the questions for games, and we can all talk about this next year because I believe we only have one episode left this year.
yes, and that is the season closer.
Yeah, where we typically talk about how we like this year, what we plan on doing better, and so on and
Dream
so forth.
dreams for the future.
Yeah.
But for this one, we just introduced, we're going to have a series talking about video game settings, video game genres, how they work together, how they affect the experience,
Mm-hmm.
and similarities and differences between them, and even talk about combinations.
Artist settings is the music for the games.
Yeah,
And we have an entire episode about the songs from video games that we like. Memory serves, you like the Mario Galaxy stuff, and me was Twilight Princess
yeah.
songs.
Funny how our favorite music comes from Nintendo games.
It's almost like Nintendo has, an entire orchestra on their payroll to make music.
Yeah, but I didn't find Super Mario Odyssey that good. But
Yeah.
that's another thing
But
we
you
can.
also have to look at the fact of your favorite games are Mario Galaxy, which is a Mario sci-fi, and mine is Zelda, which is a high fantasy.
Okay, that tracks.
Like maybe you should play some more science fiction games. Granted, I will give Halo. Halo has some good music.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But is it good or is it just that iconic because everybody and their brother played Halo except for me and you
Oh, I
back when
actually did
Halo
play.
first came out?
I did play Halo 1 and 2.
Oh, then it's just me who never played Halo.
Yeah, we had an original Xbox.
Speaking of Halo, reminds me of Portal. Is Portal a puzzle game? And
Yeah,
is that a post-apocalyptic? What kind of category does puzzle games fall under?
puzzle games is a genre, not a setting. And I think Portal would technically be a sci fi setting. And Portal 1 really isn't post apocalyptic. It's Portal 2 that more has more post apocalyptic stuff.
Oh, but could you? Now that makes me wonder. Could you do a post-apocalyptic puzzle game? Are there certain settings that you can't do with genres? That's another thing we could talk about.
Yeah. Of course, one big thing we need to talk about within each setting and genre is what makes that setting or genre.
Yeah, because first-person shooters don't just have guns; they have lots of guns.
And you cannot do a first person shooter with all melee weapons because then it wouldn't be a shooter.
What are you talking about? I know somebody who, when they play Call of Duty, all they run is a knife.
Yeah, but Call of Duty doesn't only have knives.
That is true.
Yeah,
Speaking of knives, I actually had a fun project and I was whittling, and I whittled my own knife.
so you made a knife with another knife.
Yes, but this knife is made of wood.
Kind of like Bender that one scene. He's like, oh, I better carve myself a shank and takes out a knife and starts carving.
No, I was just whittling because I was practicing my feathering, and turned out making a knife. That's another thing we could talk about. Certain games that you have to have certain aspects. Like you said, you can't run a bunch of guns and melees, and first you have to have both in a first person shooter. But could you do guns in like a melee focused game like Dark Souls?
That'd be kind of a stretch.
Yeah, but at the same time, how does that differ for like the combat in some of the games? Because there are mods that you can actually add guns into the Souls games, but guns in Dark Souls is Bloodborne, so I guess it works. But that's a post-apocalyptic. I'd say Bloodborne's more post-apocalyptic than Dark Souls.
Of course, I've never played any of them.
I know somebody who's played a lot of them. When we bring those games up, that's another thing as far as like difficulty. Like Dark Souls games are known for being difficult.
Not as difficult as some Nintendo games, though.
Yeah, like the Super Mario Dark World or Dark.
Lost Levels,
Yeah, that one. Thank you.
otherwise known as Japanese Super Mario Brothers 2,
Exactly. In
or
my personal opinion, platformers I'd say are probably some of the hardest games,
oh yeah, they definitely can be.
especially older platformers.
Yeah.
Castlevania is a high fantasy platformer.
There you go. You thought of one.
Yeah, took me a while because I was thinking because I was thinking back to my days where I was playing, OG emulators and like playing like the original Sonic games. Which I don't know.
Ooh.
Yeah, I had a computer that had a bunch of emulators and stuff, but that's long, long time ago. And one of the games I tried playing on there was Castlevania, and that was a platformer because it was 2D. That's another thing: 2D platformers versus 3D platformers.
Yes.
And then there's the Dark Souls version of platformers, which is Getting Over It. I think is the name of the game.
With the guy in the cauldron with the pick,
I think it's a sledgehammer.
sledgehammer, whatever.
I don't know, but yeah. And then there's like apparently a 3D version of that with teammates,
Ooh,
and you're
yeah.
chained together. Apparently, I don't know what it's called, but like, what?
Yeah, I've seen that too. It's like, that had the same things. Like, really?
I don't know what it is. If any of our viewers know, please let us know because I'm actually intrigued by it and kind of want to get me and Not Much to try to maybe stream that. I'd like to try to get back into streaming, but that's further and further out of reach due to scheduling issues.
Yeah, unfortunately, I still have the same internet with the same 2 megabits per second upload speed, which means I really can't stream.
Yep.
I know this is a pretty short episode for us, but
Yeah, it is.
to be
I'm
fair,
just sitting here trying to think of like different settings. How have settings changed over the years from games to games?
yeah.
Like if you look at like the original Metal Gear games, that was that went from like Cold War to modern war over the years.
And from 2D to 3D.
Yeah, that's another thing we could talk about as far as settings, but that's also the progression of games. But
Yeah,
that also can affect the settings of games.
yeah. And totally different experience.
Mhm. Final Fantasy, high fantasy sci-fi.
I think that's called science fantasy. Yeah, they actually have a name for that combination.
That's science fantasy, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
like Star Wars is science fantasy.
No, Star Wars is just Star Wars. That's its own category. Everything else is a Star Wars knockoff.
Including Lord of the Rings, even though J.R.R. Tolkien wrote that way before George Lucas even thought of Star Wars. It's still a knockoff, right?
No, I'm talking about more like the space fantasy games, like Halo, Warframe, Destiny, just knockoffs of Star Wars. Although the one that still throws me for a loop is Harry Potter being a knockoff of Star Wars. Orphan boy left at his uncle, left there by a strange old man. Later meets the strange old man, gets taught by another old man about this ancient, powerful magic, and they all have sticks that are chosen to them.
But Luke's aunt and uncle didn't abuse him like the Dursleys did Harry.
While that is true, that's just a slight difference so there's no copyright issues. You ever wonder if anybody like that we rip on is ever actually going to see our podcasts and try to get us canceled?
How can you cancel something which barely even exists?
That's a valid point. Now, if we get more listeners and more followers, we'll try to do more episodes, right?
Well, yeah.
The issue comes down to scheduling.
Yeah. My schedule's pretty open, but yours is more
I could
restricted.
be open one day, completely slam the next.
Yeah. But I think that's about all we have for this series introduction.
Yeah.
If,
If any of our viewers have ideas as far as, hey, can y'all talk about this kind of setting and or anything, send it in. We're on X, formerly known as Twitter.
at
We have our own
Gamersperience,
Discord. Email us.
gamersperience at gmail.com,
We have a YouTube channel too. I forgot about that.
and a Patreon.
Oh, we got a Patreon now?
Yeah, I actually made us a Patreon.
Wow. So y'all can support us on Patreon now, apparently.
Yes. Right now,
And with that, I have no idea what we give you. A thumbs up.
I actually can look it up real quick. I mean, I can't remember everything off the top of my head. I do know we only have 2 tiers because we don't really have all that much to offer right now.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure we could do probably like a Q&A where they can join us in the podcast thing and, ask us actual questions.
I'm getting it's by the way, it's patreon.com/gamersperience. G's actually capitalized.
Nice.
Of course, first setting is a supporter at $1 a month. All supporters get access to audio that only has loudness normalization, so you don't have to crank the volume, and graphic EQ bass boost, so it doesn't quite sound quite as annoying because Discord likes to cut the bass, but nothing else. Like an uncut episode, you can listen to that $1 a month. And I'm going to be putting back episodes on when I remember to.
Yeah.
Except episode 1, because I kind of lost that one.
Yeah. And then you get to hear the unedited things where, he'll cut half of my tangents off.
Yeah, because they get a little too long, or I cough, or say something that's not completely related, or Elfness
Yeah.
comes in talking about the pets.
Yeah.
Also, get the supporter role on our Discord, which gives you access to a supporters only text and voice channel.
Oh, yeah.
Postcard tier at $5 a month gives you all that, plus we will actually send you a postcard once a month with handwritten messages from us.
That means you have to come and see me.
Yeah, I know.
Hey, that's a reason for you to come into town and say hi.
Yeah, definitely. Because maybe I
Please,
actually...
somebody become a supporter so he has to see me.
Yeah, at the postcard tier.
That's what, tier 2?
Yeah, the second tier.
How much is that?
$5 a month.
That might be pushing some of our wallets.
Yeah, but I've already got
If somebody
the
has it, great. By the way, all money that goes to the Patreon and everything goes to help us as far as to help the podcast itself.
Yes.
For instance, paying for Patreon, because apparently we have to pay for that. Better mic equipment.
Well, I'm pretty sure Patreon takes a cut of whatever we get.
Oh, is that their payment, or do we actually still have to pay?
I didn't have to. They didn't ask for me for payment information when I set it up, so they're taking a cut.
Oh, well, then it's for better mics. Buying the postcards.
Yeah.
If we get enough, we were talking about maybe making dice for our viewers, like birthdays or something.
And for guest gifts, but
yeah,
any money that we end up getting after all the fees and stuff is going to go towards improving the podcast with like equipment, software licenses, whether they're subscriptions or just buy once, promoting gamer experience like ad campaigns and maybe a pay tier on X or something, and fulfilling Patreon rewards.
It just dawned on me. Next month will be the end of our 3rd year doing this podcast.
Yeah, it will. And we're still tiny.
Yeah. Oh, that's because we're both broke and have no way of actually really promoting.
Which is kind of why I started the Patreon.
So maybe we can actually start promoting.
If we can actually get some paid memberships.
Yep.
So please.
I've been passing out the cards you gave me.
I have as well, whenever I can.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who might be interested. I mean, if you really
our biggest thing is word of mouth. If y'all have friends or family that like listening to two guys just bullshit and talk about games, tell them about us. I still find it funny. What was it? Who was it? One of our guests found us and liked us because we weren't like all the other gaming podcasts where we and whatnot.
I think that was probably the Amethyst Dragon.
Yeah, I think it was Amethyst Dragon. We should have him back on the show at some point.
Yeah.
Wouldn't mind getting Backseat Gorilla back on here.
Oh, he's a great guest.
Oh yeah, no. Love having him on.
Of course, I think this is probably not good enough for him, honestly.
Nah, I don't know. I hope it is. There's also the one group that we had that was over in China.
Oh yeah, Ryan. He lives from the Encounter Table podcast, which hasn't uploaded an episode in a really long time.
Really? Hope everything's all right with him.
Yeah.
I do enjoy having a lot of our guests. Wouldn't mind having Elfney back on at some point.
Elfness, you mean?
Yeah, my other half.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that we've had on here that I'd like to have back on.
Yeah, me too. But that's gonna do it for this relatively short episode.
Yeah,
I'm not much 23.
and I'm Chaos Assassin,
This is Gamer Experience. And as
and we
always,
invite you to have your own gamer experience.